and welcome to the February 19th edition of Beyond the Headlines. My name is Colin Dowe, and I'm pleased to be your host to what is now this award-winning television magazine program. So whether you're joining us via GBN Television, GBN Radio, any of our social media platforms, thank you so very much for having us be a part of your Monday evening. This evening, we're tackling the Tobago oil spill and addressing some of the potential impacts on Grenada. We are expecting to have Mr. Alan Stewart. He is the director of the Tobago Emergency Management Agency. In addition to that, I have in studio with me, now a regular, Inspector Dexter Roberts, who is the operations officer of the Grenada Coast Guard, and online maritime attorney Anslem Clouden. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Clouden, good evening to you and welcome.
Grateful that you have me on the program tonight. Thank you.
Absolute pleasure. Inspector Roberts, let me, just for the viewers' purposes, in addition to the three guests that I announced, and of course we expect Mr. Stewart to be joining us a little later, we anticipated having a representative from NADMA on with us. Unfortunately, that is not going to happen. So we would have to lean on the expertise of our two Grenadian colleagues in order to share about the Grenada's resources and potential responses. And I would deliberately start with you, Inspector Roberts. We heard recently, well, just give us some background really on your understanding and the briefing that you would have received on what has transpired in Tobago.
Well, good evening to the listening public and the viewers. What I can say is that we have received information that an oil tanker would have overturned off the coast of Tobago, and as a result, oil would have leaked into the sea. This oil has been, traveling and been dispersing over. From the latest information that I'm aware of, that oil has moved quite a distance away from Tobago and is somewhere close to our exclusive economic zone. Mm-hmm. By that I mean it's a 200 nautical miles of Grenadian water space. So that oil supposed to be either in or very close to that exclusive economic zone at the moment. Now the question is, and what is on most people's mind, is the potential impact for Grenada. Mm-hmm. But what I can say is that it is highly unlikely that this oil would impact Grenada, though it's not improbable, but it is highly unlikely given the current and the way the current runs and stuff like that. It would take that oil away from the shores of Grenada, but it's not something that is out of the woods.
Okay. From what I would have seen, and certainly from releases from NAGMA, it seems to be about 30 nautical miles away from Grenada. There was one report that suggested Point Saline, and I'm not sure that was accurate, the 30 nautical miles away. But the projections seem to be southwest of us currently, and then a northward curvature that would, leave us in the clear. Is that accurate?
That's in terms of the distance. My last information that I would have received was 64 nautical miles from Point Saline. Okay. So it is not that close to Point Saline as maybe you would have heard. And you're right with regards to the curvature or the pattern, the current. It will take it away from Grenada in a northwesterly direction. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, Mr. Clouden, on face, this seems to be a boating accident. What legal measures are available to countries involved to assist in mitigating the impact of any economic challenges or environmental challenges that may be faced?
No. Well, the first and paramount consideration that must be given is really the responsibility of those who created the spill. And they have a duty and an obligation to contribute to its cleanup. This is before you consider things as environmental damage, damage to the ecosystem, dead fish on the shores, birds. The entire maritime environment is now contaminated by this toxic emission of petroleum. So that those things would have to be assessed as you go along. The paramount importance now is cleanup efforts to contain the spill. This ought to be given anxious consideration. Yes. And then subsequently, there's an international way of making those type of assessments.
Okay.
Scientific and
right, understood. And Inspector Roberts, just share with us really, because from the information I have received, based on the currents, the spill is moving like at 9 miles per hour. That's pretty quickly. Containing the spill is a challenge, because from the information released certainly out of Tobago is that while the leak has been slowed, it has not been stopped. And if we are to have a conversation about cleanup, it might be easier to do a cleanup close to the area of the wreckage. But when we start moving, as it has been, 64 nautical miles off of Point Saline, what can we do? What can be done?
Well, there are different approaches to clean up. For example, there is what is called, you can corral or use what they call booms and corral the oil in a particular area, and then you use what is called skimmers and skim that oil into containers and take it away for disposal. Or you can use chemical dispersant. So you can get dispersant that would be sprayed onto the oil, and then you can break it up in place, and then it can maybe dissipate. So these are some means of getting rid of the oil. And the dispersant in itself, its effectiveness depends on how soon you use that dispersant, because the longer the oil stays in the water, it becomes a little bit more troublesome in terms of dispersing. It becomes much thicker, so it's very difficult for the dispersant to act on it now. What is called there's a term used for it. So it all depends on how soon you use the dispersant and how sensitive the area is where the oil is going to. You might want to contain that oil and prevent it from going ashore, where maybe it can cause damage to ecosystems, mangroves, or maybe tourist areas, as the case may be. So there are different methodologies that can be applied in terms of controlling or mitigating.
But when the oil is out to sea, as it is now, what type of response? I mean, are we speaking of getting ships to race ahead of the oil that is traveling in order to put down the booms to contain, put in the dispersant? I know, for example, in Trinidad now, in Tobago, peat moss is being used to absorb. There is also a blessing of sargassum seaweed. We curse it, right, but it is quite absorbent itself and seem to be assisting. But what type of response do we make when that the spill is so far out?
Well, the type of response would be determined by the on-scene commander, the person that is in charge of the response, coordinating the response to that incident. And like I say, it depends on the oil, the amount, the thickness, as the case may be. That will determine how you go about, containing that oil, whether you apply booms, and that might be also dependent on the environmental condition, the wind state, the sea state. That could affect maybe your application of the booms, as well. So all of these factors must be taken into consideration when you're deciding what method to use in order to control that oil.
Okay, Mr. Clouden, just in terms of Grenada's preparedness, are you aware of an actual structure? We know there is NAGMA, National, Disaster Management Agency, but in addition to that, we heard of a National Emergency Response Team and a subcommittee of that response team being an oil spill committee. Are you aware of the makeup of this committee and what their charge may be?
No, I'm not, but I've heard of it. But most importantly, we need to have an oil spill contingency plan in place for a variety of reasons. One, our proximity to Trinidad and Tobago, oil-producing countries, our proximity to Venezuela, another oil-producing country, and some of the world's shipping lanes coming from South America and North America going south is very close proximity to Grenada. So there are oil tankers traversing not the exclusive economic zone, as my friend said, the territorial sea. You can see these huge tankers going north and coming down south. So that what we need in Futero in the future is to seriously, NAGMA, they perform a worthwhile and important function, but they're most centered and designed for land-like events like hurricanes, or you have some tidal wave action on the coastal zone. Really, we have to get our Coast Guard and get it efficient, innovative, use drones and the like to monitor our coast more effectively and have a plan that we can deploy in cases of emergency. Because we are in close proximity to oil-producing countries.
Right.
So that's what I think we need first and foremost, a comprehensive oil spill contingency plan, both for the coastal zone, because a lot of the ships in the inner harbors emit some of the crude and bilge oil and the like into the coastal waters, and it contaminates it, it kills the reefs. It does all manner of destruction to the marine ecosystem. So we have to be conscious of that and come in with a Coastal Zone Management Act that would manage the operation of yachts emitting some of the toxic and deleterious waste into our coastal waters. So it's wider and deeper than just a plan directed specifically to oil spills. It has to be more comprehensive to deal with coastal zone management to protect our coastal ecosystem. And I pray God that this oil spill will change its course, because if it comes here, we will have to seek regional and international assistance, because we lack that level of preparedness. We haven't been thinking in that context and direction. We think about hurricanes and the like, not necessarily oil spills.
Inspector, I think that's the point. Where we may be close to oil-producing nations, Trinidad, Venezuela, now Guyana, it is, while we may say highly improbable, but it is a possibility for us to have a damaged ship and causing some problems in terms of oil coming to within our waters and onto our shores. What processes, procedures, protocols are in place for something of that nature?
Well, we do have a national oil spill contingency plan in place, or like what Mr. Clouden would have, alluded to. We do have such a plan in place, and as a result of the incident in Tobago, the national part of that plan calls for a national response team. And as a result, that national response team has been activated as a result of that plan to look into the impact of the spill on Grenada. So there is indeed a plan in place for such eventuality because of our proximity to the shipping lane for the the oil passing vessels.
Who's the membership of that national response?
So it's all of government membership in terms of agencies, departments, plus stakeholders. So you would have persons like stakeholders like the tourism, dive operators, I guess the fisher folks. So it's an all-encompassing team of stakeholders that comprises that team. So that team is in place, and I would have attended a meeting sometime last week as part of that national response team looking at that.
If you could just give us a greater insight, because there's one thing, this is the potential fallout that we anticipate seeing, fisher folk, tourism, etc., even environmentalists.
Right.
I'm interested in cleanup, prevention, mitigation. Who are the experts on the team that will be able to address the cleanup campaign, the containment of the spill, etc.?
Okay. Well, as we speak, based on the plan, the contingency plan, the Coast Guard commander is responsible, or the Coast Guard is responsible for response. So the Coast Guard commander becomes the on-scene commander, meaning that he's the one that is responsible for coordinating all of the cleanup efforts at the site of that spill, right? His responsibilities do not only lie with the cleanup, but in terms of getting resources that are needed, because on island we do not have all the resources that we would need in case we have a major oil spill, and that is where we have a regional effort would come in eventually in case we do have a major spill. And the plan, the contingency plan, has a 3-tier system of activation. So, for example, for a small minor spill, that's a tier one. You have a partial activation of the national response team. So the entire team will not come out. Just maybe selected members will be asked to come out and meet at a certain place to look at the response for that. Right? A tier 2 is where you have a full activation of all the team members of the national response team, and that's where you have a major spill that requires all of a more greater effort. And then you have the tier 3, where you will have the regional and maybe international assistance in terms of dealing with major spills. Mm-hmm. But the Coast Guard is responsible for initial response, on-scene command, and we will go out there. We would investigate. We will look at the size of the spill, the direction that it is traveling, the type of of oil that it is. Take samples and bring show for testing and stuff like that. That's basically the Coast Guard role and responsibility with regards to that.
Is there any equipment on island to address containment? We spoke of booms, we spoke of the moss, etc., right, that is being utilized now in Trinidad. Is there anything on island to address that?
Yes, there are booms. The petroleum importing companies, Rubisan and the other company, they have Shell. They have booms, and they have a whole bunch of different equipment that are that could be used with regards to the oil spill response. Containers for putting for putting in the oil that has been skimmed up, absorbent material to soak up oil, as the case may be, and then you have dispersant. So all of these are some of these are stockpiled at the respective companies.
So this is something that is an obligation of the oil importing companies, and not necessarily held within our national framework.
Well, I'm not too sure, but I know that the companies, they have an obligation to have such equipment at the disposal in case there is a spill at the area where the oil is being pumped into their storage unit. Also, the Grenada Port Authority also has some equipment that they in their storage as well. Okay. So in terms of a national storage, I'm not too sure about that, and that's where the folks at NADMA and them would be able to expound more on that.
Okay. Anslem, if you have a wish list of things that you'd like to see at the national level, you did make reference to a coastal management system, a coastal management act. But what are some of the things that you would want to see in place in order for us to be better prepared for this eventuality?
Well, as the Coast Guard personnel pointed out, you do have ships coming to discharge petroleum and other such substances. They have booms, and sometimes you will see them circle at the delivery point at Queen's Park. But we are speaking of a spill, the magnitude of which far exceeds these petty spills that are likely to occur and sometimes don't. We lack capacity. So that the first thing I would like to see is a deliberate effort, because things have been left unattended to for so long. The country is almost at the brink of collapse. But we're striving forward, and one of the things I would like to see with respect to maritime and national security is a comprehensive piece of legislation that deals, which is multifaceted and integrated to contain eventualities such as we are addressing tonight. So, I would like to see that come into effect. And possibly a maritime administration. Because you see, maritime activity, carriage of goods by sea, collision at sea, I mean, you name it. It has to be governed by domestic legislation, and we must make provision for a multiplicity of eventualities that may occur from time to time. So in the shipping area, we may choose to implement an international shipping registry where ships could be registered here, and we'd have certain qualitative control over what they do because they carry our flag, just as St. Vincent does. Those are the areas we have to consciously and deliberately address.
Let me just ask, would you,
maritime area.
And let me just give you a challenge here. Would you be willing to take lead, utilizing existing legislation to probably pilot a proposal that can be considered by the Attorney General's chambers or the Ministry of Legal Affairs that would address coastal management, that will address, our maritime security issues? Other countries would have done it. We have not yet done so. Would it be something that you, being a maritime expert, be able to take on?
Colin, I worked my first maritime job after practicing in Nova Scotia for a while was at the U.S. Virgin Islands. I was hired there as a coastal zone management specialist, and one of the delegated responsibility was to improvise an oil spill contingency plan for the U.S. Virgin Islands. Remember, at the time, you had a refinery, Hess Refinery in St. Croix. And you had Martin Marietta, another bauxite producing company in St. Croix. And all kinds of emissions into the coastal zone. So I was commissioned under NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency of the United States, of America to draft out, with the assistance, of course, of those bodies, a comprehensive coastal zone management act, which we did. Now, our coastal zone is being destroyed by all these yachts without holding tanks. They just emit all the toxic and deleterious material into the coastal zone. So much so that reef outside of in Grenada, outside of Silver Beach, that's a dead reef, because where Mount Pandy is, all these yachts they emit the waste into the ocean with impunity, and it kills our coast. It kills our ecosystem. The fish run away, and artisanal fisheries suffer. So we need to focus more on our maritime resources.
Let me repeat the question to Anslem, Clouden, potential KC. Will you lead the charge in proposing, as you did for the U.S. Virgin Islands, a Coastal Management Act for the consideration of government?
Colin, I'm so grateful for your kind comments, but I'll do anything to advance the environmental hazards that we're in, and I am prepared to submit a draft of what I may consider as a Coastal Zone Management Act for Grenada. Of course, I would draw on my experience from the U.S. Virgin Islands, where I worked for 2 years on that project.
All right. Okay. Inspector, just from what you would have observed and your own wishes for Grenada, do you believe that what we saw in Tobago was an immediate or as an immediate response as we could have had? And were the disbursement of resources as efficient as you would have liked to have seen? And as you think of it, if it was Grenada, was that the type of response we would anticipate we would have gotten?
Well, I must say I am not too, familiar with the level of response. I know that the Tobago's government, assembly would have responded, but the nature of their response I'm not too too familiar, so I cannot speak to how they responded. It would be good to know, how they respond to that incident as a template going forward. So maybe from that, maybe we can draw on their experience in the event we do have such an incident, in the future. But I can't really speak to their response and how they would have responded to that incident.
Okay, we'll bring things home, but viewers, it is time for first break. We're of course going to come back and talk a little bit more about the Tobago oil spill and potential impacts on Grenada.
RKD Theatre and Grenada Cooperative Bank present Journey to Gold, written and directed by Ricardo Keynes Douglas. Journey to Gold brings to life 50 years of Grenadian politics through song, dance, and theatre. Join us at the Grenada Trade Center on Saturday, March 2nd at 8 p.m. and Sunday, March 3rd at 7 p.m. Advance tickets are $50, so get them now at Grenadian Optical, St. George's, and Spiceland Mall, Gittins Pharmacy, Grand Dance, and online at gotofet.com. See you on March 2nd and 3rd for Journey to Gold. Associate sponsor, Judah Sound. This ad complements Hubbard's.
The Planning and Development Authority of Grenada, PDA, is enforcing regulations to curb illegal, disorderly, and unauthorized development in several locations throughout the state of Grenada. The authority is concerned that structures mainly associated with vending are negatively impacting the environment, has undesirable public health and sanitation consequences, present obstructions to vehicle and pedestrian traffic, can become projectiles during adverse weather conditions, and generally affect affect the aesthetics of the nation. The PDA will work along with stakeholder ministries and institutions to effect the demolition, removal, and disposal of structures which fall in the category of illegal and disorderly development, commencing January 2024. In this regard, persons who vend in or occupy such illegal structures are advised to secure their personal belongings and have the structures removed ahead of the planned PDA demolition operations. These actions of the PDA have become necessary to safeguard and protect public health and the environment, ensure the safety and well-being of all citizens and visitors, discourage any future disorderly construction, and encourage compliance to regulations pertaining to physical development in the state of Grenada. This is a message from the Planning and Development Authority of Grenada.
Welcome back, viewers. We're speaking of the Tobago oil spill and its potential impact on us here in Grenada. With me in studio is Inspector Dexter Roberts and Anslem Clouden. Mr. Clouden, let me just come back. If you can just map out what are some of the next steps legally one can anticipate, because there is a fallout in Tobago as the oil spill moves. Venezuela and other countries potentially can be impacted. If we are to trace what the legal response can be, who can be held accountable and how can they be held accountable? If you just give us from some other examples what we can anticipate happening in the next few weeks or months.
Yes. Well, the first thing you have to determine who caused the spill. Okay. I understand from reading some reports from Trinidad and Tobago, including here in the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Prime Minister Rowley, said that in the course of trying to identify the owners or the registration of the ship, I understand it was a tug carrying a barge and what have you. But that identification seemed to be somewhat elusive. What I do know, however, is that once you identify the party that caused the spill, then legal consequences would follow as a result. I mean, you have beaches to clean up. Now, the difficulty is when it comes to determining the natural resources of the area of the spill, the fish, the lobsters, you name it, the mangroves, the beaches and the like. Now, there's a cost to clean up. That cost is usually borne by those responsible for the spill. And the IMCO, the International Maritime Organization, has certain regulations that you follow in terms of assessment. It depends on where the spill has impacted most severely, and as a consequence, you have tremendous loss. You have seen from other spills where dead fish, zillions of them come ashore. Well, that would adversely affect the fish stock. So there's an assessment with respect to damages scientifically attributable to that loss of the living resources as fish, birds. In certain areas you do have seagulls, and they're considered relevant species. Their loss too and their depletion would have an adverse effect on the environment itself. So there is a cost, and that cost is normally assessed through international regulations and the like.
Okay, so the numbers I saw is that it's upwards of 10 million TT dollars being spent on cleanup and counting. What I'm hearing from you, Mr. Clouden, is that there is a formula that can assess. Well, the cost of cleanup is more or less easy to ascertain, but when we look at the loss of potential revenue for our fisher folk or tourism industry, whether it is those to go out diving, whether it is loss of use of our beaches, etc. There is a formula that one can calculate what the impact of such an oil spill is likely to be.
You're very correct. Yes, there is.
Okay.
Such an assessment that is regulatory. That's why I resorted to IMCO, the International Maritime Organization. They have come up with regulations that aid in the assessment of damages, depending on the species fit. It's all environmental and directed to that area that the spill has adversely affected.
Okay, and the party responsible, would it be, well, yes, the owners, but is it normal for a vessel to have insurance that will be able to cover this type of incident, and to what amount?
Yes, because most of the international shipping registries, our closest neighbor, St. Vincent, Panama, Liberia, those are a popular international shipping registry. There's a mandatory insurance that these registry must administer to the ships they register. It's mandatory that they take out certain insurances against such eventuality. To what extent they contribute ultimately, because you're speaking of millions and millions and millions of dollars. I mean, when you destroy a beach or a mangrove, it's costly. Yeah, so that there's a formula. It's all in international instruments with respect to carriage of goods and the like by sea.
Okay, all right. Inspector Roberts, what can we do at this stage? Were you able, or do you have the equipment to, the spill did get into Grenadian territorial waters. Does the Coast Guard have the type of ship that can go out to do an inspection? Is that necessary? Has it become necessary? Has it been done? Is it something being considered?
Well, in my time at the Coast Guard, we have never had an incident where we have to respond to an oil spill. Mm-hmm. But if we were to have an incident now where the Coast Guard would have to go out and monitor and do assessment, we have vessels that we can utilize. Mm-hmm. And remember also, a major oil spill is a national event, and the government would be able to make available the necessary resources. So let's say, for instance, Coast Guard, doesn't have the vessel that is needed, and there is some vessel that is available locally. I guess that could be commandeered, or can be some arrangement could be made to utilize that vessel to go there.
So 65 nautical miles off the coast of Point Saline. Do we need to commandeer, or do you have a vessel that you can go out to do an inspection today?
I would say we have a vessel that we can go out and do an inspection today. Mm-hmm. I would say that, yes.
Okay. And just coming back to our own response, what type of conversations, collaborations, because you did say that the Oil Spill Committee met a day last week, what type of insights was gotten from, being received from Tobago? What type of advice and intelligence have we been able to give the folks in Tobago?
Well, I'm not privy to speak on the outcome of that meeting, but what I can say is that the NADMA is in contact with the authorities in Tobago. So there is collaboration, there is communication between Trinidad and Grenada in terms of what is happening. So all for the purpose of monitoring the situation for any possible impact to Grenada. So there is communication, there is interaction between the various agencies.
Okay. Let me just say something that I would have read. There was initially a conversation that boat was leaving Panama on its way to Guyana. Radar tracking seems to suggest it left Venezuela and was en route to St. Vincent. Can you comment on any of this in terms of your knowledge from being appraised of the situation, or just your own following of it, where these boats were coming from or heading to?
I cannot comment on that. I have no information relevant to that.
Okay.
So I cannot speak to that.
Okay. Mr. Clouden, you mentioned that the ships will have that IMO, International Maritime Organization, registration number, and it seemed to be elusive, that was your term, in the case of this vessel. Why is that so? I mean, for an aircraft, you look at the tail and you see N, whatever the number is, it's N tells you it's registered in the US, the number brings you to the aircraft, the owning company. Isn't there a standard place the divers could have gone? Because from my information, it's not in deep waters. It's about 30 to 40 feet of water. I mean, that's not deep. So getting to the vessel is not a problem, but identifying the IMO registration number seems to be a challenge.
Well, Colin, I can't comment on that because it's strange, to say the least. But these numbers are to be placed in a conspicuous part of the boat, sometimes at the side or at the stern, where it says IMO and you give that number. You cannot register a ship with international shipping registry without displaying your IMO registration number on the ship. That's international regulations. I was, on other parts, NDC administration, I was the ambassador to the IMO. So I am quite familiar with IMO regulations and the like. Although I never attended any of the international meetings, but I certainly corresponded and got updates on amendments to all laws and regulations that they had promulgated.
Okay. Taking off your attorney hat for a second, pure common sense, would you be led to believe that this ship was involved in illegal activities, which is why the IMO registration number cannot be found, one, and two, there were no witnesses because there were no souls found aboard the ship, and no registration number?
I tend to agree with you. I have no doubt that there is something amiss. But there have been pilfering going on with all the sanctions and this, that, and the other. All kinds of unorthodox things happen. And that's one of them. So it leads one to the inescapable conclusion that there is something amiss, something irregular about that ship and where it discharged its oil and what have you. Something irregular about it. Because even for some few days after the discharge, the government of Trinidad and Tobago were unable to give any definitive explanation as to the nature of the spill, the origin of the ship, registry of the ship, and the like. So that's how they do that aspect of the trade.
I can't tell you to take off your operations officer of the Coast Guard hat, and you are first a member of the RGPF.
That's right.
But from your own experience, when you see that there is a challenge in identifying the IMO registration number, would you believe that there is something strange going on here, separate and apart from a mere boating accident?
Well, by law, all vessels are required to carry the IMO numbers once they're registered and with an IMO number. The reason why it's not being displayed, it could be for a multiplicity of reasons. At this point in time, I cannot venture to say, what sort of activities that vessel was engaged in. I don't have such evidence or information to make any claim to that. But so yeah, and I cannot take out my
Well, I would not expect you to not be a member of the Royal Grenada Police Force, but maybe I can just exercise some liberties. It is probably an open secret that there are merchants in our waters, or certainly within Caribbean waters, selling fuel at significantly discounted prices. Is this something that you have heard previously? And is this a possibility in this case?
I do not know if it's a possibility, but I'm aware of the illegal sale of fuel within the Caribbean region. But in that instance, I have no information with regards to whether or not this was a case in point.
Okay. Anslem, would you go there?
Well, it's evident. The inertia, the inability of the Trinidad and Tobago authorities to make a definitive determination very early as to the spill. This is not the first spill that has happened. We read and see spills that have occurred in all different countries, from the United States, Cuba, where have you. The fact is, it's acted on with great alacrity and urgency. And everything is, it was the big spill by this tanker, the big spill by that tanker, as the case may be. And the cleanup, the containment and cleanup efforts are made, and that's where you go. Something amiss. There's something that doesn't appear right. Mm-hmm. There's a way that seems right, and this one doesn't seem right. You must have your IMO number displayed. That's a fact. That's part of your condition of international registration. So I differ with the Coast Guard personnel when he says that it doesn't have to be. It must be displayed and it must be visible to determine whether there's compliance and that your registration is authentic. I had an incident with the Dolly Sea many years ago when she was interdicted in the English Channel and brought into to England, and we had to have her release. And she was registered here in St. Vincent. Her IMO number had to be visibly displayed so that Coast Guards intercepting you would pick up your number, phone in, and get the necessary particulars, sufficient particulars of the ship itself. So that what has happened indeed has been happening. The guys sell food over the gangway or on the port or starboard side. It's normal. In the trade, but this one got caught, I think, because it ought to have displayed its IMO particulars, which it didn't and doesn't have, apparently. And that brings it into serious international violation of shipping laws. And the violation of, if it is at all registered, which I doubt it is, in breach of IMO stringent regulations with respect to display of your IMO number.
All right. Is it uncommon, and I'll open this one up to both you gentlemen, the estimate is 35,000 barrels of fuel on board the vessel leaking out. And is it uncommon for this type of movement of fuel within our channels? One. And two, based on the cable attached to the bow, it was believed that the barge was being towed. The tugboat towing it, of course, has disappeared. But is that a normal operation, towboat or tug towing a barge with 35,000 barrels of fuel? And I'm deliberately saying fuel because we are waiting the results of the test. So it's not necessarily crude. It could be diesel. It could be gasoline. And it was very careful in all reports not to define what that fuel was. But is this a normal mode of transportation? Either of you?
Of course not. Of course not. I mean, of course not. It's not normal at all. Very abnormal. Look, the entire episode is unfortunate, and evidence that the barge disappeared. It's on its way to Guyana. You hear all kinds of reports. You don't know what to believe. And in the meantime, the coastal zone of Tobago is washed with that toxic and deleterious substance. And it's coming to us. I beg to differ somewhat with the latest pictures and assessment I've seen on Facebook. Take it for what it's worth, but it appeared authentic because it delineated our boundary, our single maritime boundary with Trinidad and Tobago. And the spill, and it looks to be quite huge, it has crossed over and is traveling in our direction. There could be no doubt about this. So that if the wind, the tide, and the currents would take it in one direction, the same wind, tide, and currents every 6 hours, you have lee tide, weather tide, winds and currents out there, it could shift it in another direction. So I don't think to say that it may escape us depending on the direction. These maritime atmospheric conditions change momentarily. I've been out there. I mean, I sail all the time. So I know what happens. That spill can turn around and head directly to Point Celine. So we have to get our act together and get some booms, 90 miles of it, and lay it on the whole, all around the west and the east coast at the bottom of Point Celine to keep it out. We can get international assistance. If it continues in the direction that I've seen it moving in, we have to be proactive, take precautionary measures. Forget about the oil spill contingency plan now, that will come later. And try to get as much booms as possible. We may be able to get the machinery that can skim up. You see, it goes, travels, it's an amphibious craft, travels on top of the oil and sucks it in. Those are the areas that we should be thinking of. You can't take chances and base your projections on hope. You must take concrete measures in the event that it gets close to us and is coming at us. We have a contingency plan to combat it. And that's my suggestion.
Inspector, a couple of things. 35,000 barrels estimated. Tobago is reporting their collection results in 2,000, so we still have 33,000 barrels out there, whether still contained within the hull of the boat or in the waters. And from the divers' report, because the anchor was in place, which means that the ship was moving, along with the cable, which suggests that it's towed. Is this something that is abnormal, and what comes to mind when these facts come to bear? What could have been taking place, an abnormal way of the ship and the oil or the fuel being transported?
Well, my knowledge of fuel tankers are basically contained, like container ships where the fuel is contained within the vessel, and the vessel has its own propulsion system and stuff like that. I've never really encountered a scene where a barge would be towing, another, or a tug towing a barge that is filled with fuel. It's my first in all my years, in the Coast Guard, the first time I've heard about that or seen such an such a vessel. That doesn't mean it's not out there. It's not a way to transport oil, but I'm not familiar with such means of transport. I'm more familiar with the tankers that coming and go in terms of carrying the fuel.
Okay.
So I cannot say that means of transportation, or to me that means of transportation doesn't really raise any red flag, because I'm not too familiar with it anyway.
Okay. And are you as worried as Mr. Clouden from your own viewing of the satellite pictures and the current tides and trajectory that we will have oil coming onto the shores of Point Celine sometime in the future?
Unlike Mr. Clouden, I'm not too worried. Yes, it's a concern that we have to monitor, and we are monitoring the spill. But Mr. Clouden talks about current and winds and stuff like that. Yes, current and winds are there. These are the environmental factors that must be taken into consideration. But in my study of navigation and current and winds, they tend to follow a particular path, and they don't really deviate from that. So you have current that are running in a particular direction right throughout. They might run at different speed, at different times, but like how you have the northeast trade winds, that winds, from, since we're small here, about the northeast trade winds. So they tend to follow a particular route. So it has to be a very abnormal set of circumstances that would cause the current and the wind to change from the constant pattern of travel to really carry that oil to the shores of Grenada. Now, I'm not saying it cannot happen, but the probability of it happening is very slim. So I'm not as worried. Yes, I'm concerned. It's an environmental issue. I'm concerned, of course, but I'm not too worried about a possible or a high occurrence of impact on Grenada. It's minimal. In my opinion, it's minimal based on my study of the currents and wind patterns and stuff like that. It would tend to take it away from the shores of Grenada.
Okay. All right, viewers, we are discussing the Tobago oil spill and its potential impacts on Grenada. It's time for a second break, so we'll take this break and we will come back shortly. And when we're back, we certainly would want to hear from you.
Are you a VIP? Have you taken the necessary steps to safeguard your child's health? Let's get it right. Get your child on their vaccination schedule. Our national protection and coverage is our national priority. Our actions will impact Grenada's health and wellness. Let's make childhood immunization and vaccination number one. I am Senator Jonathan Lacrette, and I am a VIP champion. Let's make all our children VIPs, vaccinated, immunized, and protected.
Let's all be VIP champions.
A message from the Ministry of Health, Wellness and Religious Affairs, Be a VIP Childhood Vaccination and Immunization Campaign in collaboration with UNICEF and the Pan American Health Organization.
But when you need someone to help you to your feet, I'll be that beacon to your highest peak. Oh, I'll be right next to you, no, I will never leave. Come on, take my hands, we got everything we need. Cause you can look to me, yes, I can. Whenever you're in need, yes, you can. Just call on me and I'll be on my way. I'll be by your side, never to divide. The light that shines our way. Wherever you ride, we'll be right there with you. Wherever you ride, we'll make your dreams come true. Next time, next time, next time, right next to you.
Nexa Credit Union, with you wherever your road leads.
Welcome back, viewers and listeners. You're in tune to Beyond the Headlines, and we're discussing the Tobago oil spill and any potential impact on Grenada. Mr. Clouden, we recognize, just from following the news report, I heard strong statements coming out of Venezuela saying that the oil nor the boats had anything to do with Venezuela. Have you heard this denial? Although the the tanker tracker seemed to be saying that the ships left from Venezuela and was en route to Vincentian waters.
I've heard that. I don't know how authentic it is, but I've heard that scenario also. And what that tells you is something unorthodox has happened, because there's a general evasion and you hear all kinds of stories far removed from who is actually responsible for the spill. And unless you can get to that, then everything else would become problematic.
That's the number that you certainly can call in and make your contributions, 440-1252, and we do look forward to hearing from you. Inspector, has there been any conversation with the authorities in Tobago for anyone from NAGMA, the Oil Spill Committee here in Grenada, to fly over to observe what their response has been like, to render assistance to them as well?
I am not aware of such conversation. It hasn't happened with the Coast Guard, and at the NADMA level, I'm not aware of that.
Mm-hmm. But would this be on your wish list, just so that you're able to be on the ground in order to witness? And just before your response, I believe we have our first caller. Good evening, caller, and welcome.
Good evening. Yes, can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Yes, I'm just calling in here to just weigh in a little bit on the issue. You know, we have two key pieces of legislation in Grenada, which is the Oil and Navigable Waters Act, Cap 218, and the Oil Pollution Damage Compensation Fund, which is an international convention which Grenada has signed on to, which is two key pieces of legislation that deals with oil if there's oil spills. This compensation fund is a fund that will kick in to assist places like Grenada. In the event that we have an oil spill, that this compensation fund is an international fund, is a treaty fund which Grenada is signatory to. Also, I tend to agree with Coast Guard Commander, Coast Guard Operational Officer, Mr. Roberts, when he says that yes, he's not. It is a concern to us, but based on the drift pattern of the oil spill, that most likely, if we get any impact from it, it is going to be negligible and not a serious disastrous impact. What I can tell you also is that Grenada, we have had measures in place to deal with oil spills, and they are people trained in oil spill management and mitigation in Grenada. Some are former Coast Guard and have been trained in that. We've had some minor oil spills before in the port that we have dealt with together with the oil companies in Grenada and deploying booms and some disposants and so on. So this with Grenada, yes, if there is a major oil spill in Grenada, there are conventions that if it is more than what we can deal with, Grenada has signed on to conventions that will kick in, and we will get international help to deal with it. But once it's something that we can manage, there is plans in Grenada. And yes, it's not that we just here and we don't know what we're doing or we just waiting. As Mr. Roberts would say, the Coast Guard is the on-scene commander for any oil spill in Grenada, and there is plans in place that it could be mitigated, and there are funds that could kick in to assist in the cleanup and so on, while litigations, legal proceedings are being taken against whoever spilled. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. So there are, and I think this was the tier 3 type of response is what the caller may have been referring to.
Yes, the tier 2 and tier 3 is where you have that large oil spill, where you would need a national effort, and that's where the national response team, each member of that team would come out to to respond to that incident. And if that incident overwhelms our national resources, then we can access regional and international resources to assist. And as the caller would have alluded to, there are conventions and funds available that Grenada can dip into with regards to compensation and getting monies to assist with the response.
Okay, I believe we have another call online. Good evening, caller, and welcome.
Yeah, good night, Mr. Dowe, and good night to your two guests. Just for information, Grenada has a Coastal Integrated Management Act. It was introduced in Parliament by the former Member of Parliament for St. John's, Alvin Dowe, some time ago. Whether the regulations related to that have been developed is another case. It's another thing to answer, but I was one of those who was part of representing civil society over a 2-year period developing that. In terms of the oil spill in particular, being the first person, and I'm taking credit for that, first informing the nation about this event in Tobago, I'm very disappointed with all the governments in the area. Regardless of what the cause of it, the spill have taken place and the slowness in responding. There's all kinds of accusation about evasion of sanction and all that kind of stuff. Whether it be the case, we have an oil spill, and I think that you could, even if you listen to the chairman of the Tobago House of Assembly, you can hear the frustration. The government of Trinidad has not acted responsibly. It is said that the fluid was destined to be offloaded in St. Vincent. Can you imagine if the accident that happened here and what happened? It goes to show how fragile we are, and the need for us to be much more vigilant and supposed to be ready to respond in a more proactive way, not the lackadaisical way that these governments are responding. I'm very disappointed with governments in the Caribbean, especially the Southern Caribbean, especially when fishermen are being affected. I mean, fishermen's livelihood in Tobago have been severely affected, and as one expert in Tobago has said, they need compensation now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Clouden, disappointed in the southern governments in terms of response?
Well, not really. I think he has highlighted some of the aspects and ended with compensation, which is the ultimate expectation of the government, I assume, of Trinidad and Tobago, whether Spil or Colin. If it should get to us, that would be our legitimate expectation that we'll be compensated. As I had alluded to, there are certain protocols and arrangements internationally to deal with these unexpected spills. And there's a global fund set up for that purpose, so that countries can access it. But it has to be done in the context of scientific information as to your loss and how you mitigate that loss.
Would you also have liked to have seen representatives from NAGMA, the Coast Guard and others go down to Tobago to witness the response and probably provide assistance?
Well, I would have thought, but you see the problem we have, and I have no doubt that ultimately we will get a well-equipped Coast Guard ship. Those we have now for rapid response and really designed for interdiction within the territorial sea.
If I can ask you just one thought, and let's just get the next caller and then we'll come back to that. Good evening, caller, and welcome.
Hi, good evening. So I have a question towards the Coast Guard representative. And my question is, in light of this situation, right, it would pretty much prove to us that there's an issue with Border Patrol. And I'm just curious because we're looking at now, no one knows, you know, the IMO number or where this came from. There's no manifest in existence that can say, you know, where this ship came from, what was on it, who owned it. And that's a big defect in Border Patrol. So my question to the Coast Guard representative is, in the nature of the Grenada's borders, is the Grenadian Coast Guard doing enough to prevent something of this nature from happening, where a barge can just be lodged in our waters and no one would have noticed it, no one would have questioned or approached these individuals to find out, hey, who are you, why are you here, you know, what is the nature of your business?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. You got a question?
Yes, I get a question. And caller, thank you for your question. And it's a good question. But there are international protocols with regards to the movement of vessels, especially through your territorial seas. And vessels are allowed to traverse from point A to point B through our territorial seas on the route, you know, from point A to point B. Yes, we have within our laws where we can stop them, we can ask them questions, but the law also gives them the right to transit without any interference from the the coastal nation or from Grenada, right? If we have some something of a suspicious nature, then we would interrogate that. But the law gives vessels the right to traverse unhindered through our territorial seas. So it's not every vessel that we see passing, we will just go and stop them and board them and search them, as the case may be. They have a right to innocent passage.
If I'm to follow up on this though, any aircraft flying through our space, the air traffic control, our tower, knows. If one is to get onto the road and there is no license plate on your vehicle, you'll be stopped by the police.
Yes.
Do we have a system similar to air traffic control for our seas so that we know what vessels, especially those traversing internationally, what vessels are passing through our waters? And following up on the question, just in terms of general border control, if we're able to cite a vessel that doesn't have the IMO registration number visible, will we then intervene?
Okay. The last, your last question in terms of the IMO number, it's not all vessels that are required to have an IMO number. It's a vessel over a certain tonnage that are required to have an IMO number, and it must be displayed conspicuously in an area where it is easily identified, and that is law, and we are aware of that, right? In terms of knowing what vessel that is transiting your waters, there is this AIS system. It's like a system where it sends out a signal, and you at the receiving end of that, it has an identifier for that vessel, so you know that vessel Pelican is passing through your territorial waters. That is the course that it is on, and that is the speed at which it is traveling. But the problem with that AIS system is that it is something that can be turned off. Right? It can be turned off. So you can be, manually turned off from the vessel itself. So vessels can choose to keep it on so that the passage can be monitored, or they can choose to turn it off, maybe in case they're involved in some kind of a nefarious activity. But there are ways of monitoring vessels. Radar, coastal radars. You can track vessel movement, as the case may be, and the AIS system.
Okay. Border control and our overall security, Mr. Clouden?
Well, I think the officer spoke to the areas that they can do the necessary checks and interdict certain vessels. And he's right, there's a freedom of passage, we call it innocent passage, through the territorial sea. And you can only stop a boat if you have reasonable and probable grounds to believe that they're carrying some cargo that would be prejudicial to the peace, order, and good governance of the state. So that if they have explosives on board and you have grounds to believe that, you're not supposed to just search them willy-nilly. You must have reasonable and probable grounds to interdict them and ask to search them because they have a right of innocent passage. So there's a little technical area there. And he's right, not all ships carry IMO because you have to be registered and you have to be a certain tonnage to be registered and fall within IMO regulation. Yachts don't have to carry IMO designation and the like. But the Coast Guard is mandated to ensure maritime security. And, we have to do our utmost, especially in this age of technology. You have GPS, you have all kinds of ship-to-shore, shore-to-ship communication devices that work with great accuracy. And above everything else, have the drones. So they can pinpoint. I'm surprised that we hadn't gone down to the border between Grenada and Trinidad and Tobago, where the oil spill it has just crossed into our exclusive economic zone. And we lack the capacity, but I have no doubt that we're going to get it. We have a visionary prime minister, a man who's dedicated to advancing the security of the country. So I have no doubt that very, very soon we can expect to see our maritime security increase and we become more efficient, because this area was neglected miserably in past administrations.
All right. Just coming back, just to think as to how this may have occurred. From the reports, they seem to suggest that the barge overturned and then got stuck on the reef, as opposed to it being stuck on the reef and overturning. Any idea as to where this may have happened, just from the information that you would have received? So it was like a day before the overturn took place, and the currents brought it up to shore. Any projections?
Like I said, I'm not too familiar with the incident in terms of how it happened. I guess had the representative from Tobago been on the program, he would have been able to give us all of that information. But I'm not privy to such information, so I cannot speak to how it would have happened in terms of maybe overturned or stuck on the reef, as the case may be. No.
Okay. And before we left off, before the last caller, Mr. Clouden, you were saying, my question really was whether or not you have wished representatives from NAGMA and the Coast Guard would have visited with Tobago to observe and to render assistance, and I was trying to get your thoughts on that. You're muted. You need to unmute, Mr. Clouden.
Thank you. Yes, I think, look, this is of national importance because it can affect our national environmental space. I would have thought if we had a proper Coast Guard, I don't know if these small Coast Guard, but they're efficient. From here to 30, 40, 50 miles, even 90 miles, they can man quite easy. They could have gone down there, observed the spill, interact maybe with the Tobago, Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard, discuss the possibility of containment and what have you, and come back and be more informative to the nation. You see? But, one would have thought that the commander would have initiated that procedure, because it would have made us all more aware and it would be more informative to the nation as to certain possibilities, rather than us talking. We don't have an aerial surveillance, but the drone could do that. You saw what a spectacular display we had on our 50th anniversary of independence at Queen's Park. Spectacular. The drone came down and it just had everybody in awe, So we could do the same with the Coast Guard, because this is our next frontier for development, fisheries. See where our zones are. The likelihood of fish being the living resources of the exclusive economic zone. The fish, how would it affect fish stocks? Because we may lose fish in the water column. Those are areas that we can take advantage of and be more aggressive and be more informative to the nation. And the Coast Guard is mandated to do that. They could supposed to do that.
All right. And we're coming quite quickly to the close of the program, so I will ask you for some closing comments, Mr. Clouden. In light of this reality, and it wasn't one, it was an accident, it would appear, not knowing what activities the actual ships were carrying on, but it appears to have been an accident. But given the challenges with the response that we have seen in Tobago, both by way of speed, the efficiency of cleanup, etc., and what appears to be some challenges with communication, Tobago to central government, Trinidad, certainly Trinidad and Tobago to Grenada and otherwise. Are we ready to exploit our own hydrocarbon resources, or do we have to get quite a number of things in place first before we take that step?
Well, Well, certainly we have to have a plan, a contingency plan if we're going to explore petroleum to contain whatever spill may occur around the wells. Wells you would have to drill to considerable depths to find oil, and oil is moving out. Fossil fuels, we're moving into alternative sources of energy. So oil may become obsolete in terms of putting resources in that sector. A sector that may be more favorable and economically viable without any excessive capital outlay would be natural gas. And biogas, natural gas, and we have it on our continental shelf. There are studies and seismic studies that have been done by the Russians when we were in close association with them. They did certain seismic studies. As a matter of fact, the previous administration had an agreement with them to exploit our resources, which they never did because they couldn't afford it. The water was too deep. We had an arrangement with Trinidad and Tobago. I was part of the delegation that negotiated the boundary. And we were going to have Trinidad continue on Block 21, whereas we get royalties from it. But the NMP administration felt it was in their interest to bring the Russians in. And it's like hell to know what has happened since and what the nature of those contracts are. So that ultimately, if we're going to, I wouldn't see us going by way of hydrocarbon exploitation. We have solar, we have wind. We are well positioned to benefit from, in addition, geothermal. And we get natural gas for cooking. That would be the direction I would expect our visionary Prime Minister to take.
Okay. Inspector Roberts, just some closing comments in light of this disaster and how better we can prepare should this reach our shores, whether it's on this occasion or some future occasion.
Well, what I would say is that from a response perspective, since that we at the Coast Guard are the lead agency for responding, coming out of this situation in Tobago, it will be important to have an idea as to the lesson learned, the manner in which they responded, and so we can use that as a template going forward as to areas that maybe we need to beef up in our own plans. Also, it is important for us to test maybe more often our response mechanism to to an oil spill, because we haven't had a major spill where we would have had to respond for however long. So we do not have that experience in dealing with that. So what I would like to see coming up from this incident in Tobago, that we get some form of case study, some sort of a report based on the whole response process that we can look at and see how best maybe we could fit it into our own national response mechanism. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Inspector Dexter Roberts, Attorney Anslem Clouden, thank you both for joining us and sharing of your expertise on this challenge that we potentially face by virtue of the oil spill. And for you viewers who have been with us for the last 90 minutes, thank you very much for sharing your Monday evening. My name is Colin Dowe. It was a pleasure hosting you this evening, and I look forward to being with you again in the next 6 days, 22 and a half hours. See you. Godspeed.